Hello everyone, a very good morning and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep. Welcome to the daily Hindu news analysis. So let's begin today's discussion by first looking at the topics we are going to cover today. I have chosen 3 important articles that are relevant for mains examination and a couple of important articles for prelims. Even though we have chosen few articles, trust me, these topics are relevant, very extremely important for the examination. Because most of the other articles in today's newspaper are redundant or repetitive, which we have either covered or which we are going to cover in the coming days. So from today's newspaper, these are the 5 most important articles and let's cover them in complete detail. I promise you that you don't have to go back and read the newspaper again. So if you benefit from such initiatives, do press the like button, share these videos with other aspirants, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. So let's begin with the first article from page number 12 and 18. There are 2 articles in today's newspaper that focuses on the ambitious Chandrayaan 3 mission of ISRO, which is all set to be launched on the 14th of July. In a couple of days, from India's spaceport at Sriharikota, that is at the Satish Dhawan Space Center, ISRO will be launching its 3rd lunar mission, which has been named as Chandrayaan 3. And this is a historic moment for India. Because the mission itself is very ambitious. And this marks the 3rd attempt of India to explore the lunar surface. So as a result, we need to examine this topic in complete detail. We should understand India's previous attempts with regard to studying the moon and the lunar surface. We have to talk about Chandrayaan 1 and Chandrayaan 2 and understand the importance and significance of Chandrayaan 3 mission. We should also discuss why India should invest in such expensive space missions when we have major socio-economic challenges to solve. Because there is often a debate that whether a country like India should be splurging on these high-end, high-technology missions, which are extremely expensive, and there is an argument that they will not bring immediate benefits to the common man. So let's clarify that argument. Let's have a debate on that issue as well, because you can expect a mains question or even an essay topic on these lines. So let's look at Chandrayaan 1. Let's start from the very beginning so we can understand India's attempts to reach the lunar surface and study the lunar surface and the atmosphere. ISRO's first attempt was Chandrayaan 1 back in 2008, which was launched successfully through the PSLV rocket. The Polar Satellite Launch Vehicle successfully deployed Chandrayaan 1 into orbit. This mission was including of just one payload. It just included a lunar orbiter, which was placed in the lunar orbit. And essentially it would move around the moon like a satellite, conducting experiments by using the payloads that were on board the lunar orbiter. The focus of India was to study the lunar atmosphere, the lunar surface, the chemical composition of the lunar surface, and specifically focus on the south polar region of the moon. In fact, most other countries which have reached the lunar surface, which have studied the moon, even they have focused specifically on the south polar region of the moon. Because there are many interesting aspects to look out for in the south polar areas of the lunar surface. So India's first mission, the Chandrayaan 1, deployed a lunar orbiter. It was just an exploratory mission to test the technologies to ensure that we have the capabilities to reach the lunar orbit. Because deploying a satellite or a spacecraft from the Earth's orbit and transferring it towards the lunar orbit in itself is a complicated exercise and a complicated technology. So ISRO had to demonstrate that capability first. And using these payloads in the lunar orbit, certain essential experiments had to be conducted to prepare for a future lunar landing mission. The eventual goal was to carry out a lunar landing by deploying landers and rovers on the lunar surface. And potentially in the future, even think of a crewed mission, a manned mission to the moon. To make this a reality, the initial mission was to scope out the lunar atmosphere and the surface and to establish certain basic essential technologies. So through PSLV, Chandrayaan 1 mission was launched in 2008 and India successfully deployed the lunar orbit into the precise location. This made India one of the few countries in the world which succeeded in their very first attempt in reaching the lunar orbit. So once the orbiter was deployed, it dispatched an impactor probe. An impactor probe, which was one of the payloads, got detached from the lunar orbiter and crashed into the south polar surface of the moon. This impact probe was designed to crash into the south polar surface, and as it descended into the lunar atmosphere, it would collect valuable data, scientific data. It would collect data regarding the chemical composition of the lunar atmosphere, and as it crashes into the lunar surface, it would pick up valuable data from the dust which is kicked up from the impact. This also placed the Indian flag on the moon. The impactor probe was carrying the Indian flag as well imprinted on it, thus physically marking India's presence on the lunar surface. So Chandrayaan 1 was largely seen as a successful mission. It was supposed to last 2 years, but even though the mission ended early because of certain heating issues, the mission was still deemed as a successful mission because it achieved most of the stated objectives. And more importantly, the payloads managed to detect the presence of water and ice molecules on the lunar. Through this, India became the first country to map out the presence of water and ice on the lunar surface. So as a result, Chandrayaan 1 was deemed as a successful mission and also received a lot of praise from the international scientific community as well. So following the success of Chandrayaan 1, ISRO planned a more ambitious mission that was Chandrayaan 2. Chandrayaan 2 was supposed to be launched in 2019, and the plan was to deploy a lander and a rover to conduct further experiments on the lunar surface. By carrying forward from the success of Chandrayaan 1, where basic topography, mapping, surface exploration was carried out, the mission was to take forward the success of Chandrayaan 1 and deploy the Vikram lander, named after Vikram Sarabhai, the founding father of India's space program. So Vikram lander was supposed to make a soft landing at the south polar area of the moon, and then it was supposed to deploy the Pragya rover, which would roam around the lunar surface for a few meters, conducting scientific experiments and collecting mineral samples from the lunar surface. This was the stated objective of the mission. It was supposed to be launched through GSLV Mark III, the most powerful heavy lift rocket of ISRO. The mission took off successfully in 2019. The launch was a success, but unfortunately, the Vikram lander failed to deploy as planned. Instead of executing the soft landing, Vikram lander suffered a software issue and crashed into the lunar surface. It was a hard crash that destroyed the equipment, and even the Pragya rover was not deployed. So as a result, Chandrayaan 2 mission unfortunately became a failure. The launch part of it was successful, that is via GSLV Mark III rocket. The orbiter was even placed in the lunar orbit. But when Vikram lander was deployed for a soft landing, the soft landing didn't go as planned. There was a hard crash due to a software defect. And this destroyed the lander and the rover, and the equipment was lost. But ISRO was not heartbroken. It came back stronger and planned a repeat mission, and that is Chandrayaan 3, which is all set to be launched in a couple of days. Chandrayaan 3 is more or less a replica of Chandrayaan 2, but all the mistakes that were made, the lessons that were learned, have been incorporated into Chandrayaan 3. Chandrayaan 3 would be launched through LVM3, Launch Vehicle Mark III, which is nothing but the GSLV Mark III. The previous name of this launch vehicle was GSLV Mark III. Now it's been renamed as Launch Vehicle Mark III, and this rocket would be lifting off in a couple of days from Sriharikota, and it will be deploying the Vikram lander and Pragya rover, and this time ISRO hopes to make it a successful mission. The plan is to deploy the lander and rover for at least a duration of 2 weeks. They are expected to be operational for a duration of 2 weeks, during which a lot of scientific experiments will be carried out. Is that clear? So this will help ISRO test its technologies and capabilities for a safe landing and roving mission, which will also lead to the future missions to the moon and maybe even to the Mars and other intraplanetary, exoplanetary exploratory missions. So this is the true objective of the mission. It's not just to deploy the lander and rover on the lunar surface and study the lunar surface, but also to establish the end-to-end technologies and capabilities needed for a safe landing and deployment of a rover. This could potentially make a crewed mission possible in the future. In the future, potentially Indian astronauts could be deployed on the lunar surface for a manned mission. We could think of similar unmanned missions to the Mars and other interplanetary missions as well. So that is the true potential of Chandrayaan 3, and that is why it's a very, very ambitious mission. If you look at Chandrayaan 3, the payloads are designed to study the chemical composition of the moon's surface, along with studying seismic activity and plasma concentration. The mission will also look out for presence of water, and it carries a payload called SHAPE, or spectropolarimetry of habitable planet Earth, which tracks radiation from the Earth to help identify the signatures of life. This payload is designed to look out for any habitable conditions present on these extraterrestrial bodies. This will provide enough data for future manned missions as well. That is where the true potential of this mission lies. Is that clear? So Chandrayaan 3 is not just limited to exploring the lunar surface. It's much more than that. It is establishing the end-to-end technologies and capabilities needed for a safe landing and roving experiment, looking out for habitable conditions, which could lay the groundwork for future missions that will scale up ISRO's interplanetary missions. Understood? Now, why are these missions so important? What purpose does it really serve? Apart from the scientific purpose, is there anything else which it satisfies? First and foremost, a mission like Chandrayaan is a global collaborative mission. Even though it's an indigenous mission, ISRO collaborates with other space agencies, with other countries in building these technologies. ISRO has very close collaboration with the NASA of United States, with the European Space Agency of the European Union, with JAXA of Japan, then even with Roscosmos of Russia. So ISRO works closely with these countries and global space agencies in developing these technologies. This collaborative effort strengthens international collaboration in the field of space technology and space exploration. This is ideal and conducive for the future of space missions, especially for interplanetary missions. One country alone cannot execute these complex missions. It requires a global collaborative effort. And especially the South Polar region of the moon is of great interest, as I was pointing out earlier, because this is a region which is largely hidden from sunlight. The South Polar area of the moon does not receive any sunlight. It's a shadowed area. So it has a lot of hydrogen, water and ice that dates back to millions and billions of years. There are also large craters at the south lunar surface which date back to billions of years. Basically, they could hold clues and answers to the very origin of the universe and the solar system. There could be primordial material present. There could be water molecules, hydrogen molecules present, dating back to the very beginning of the universe or the solar system, that could provide vital answers to our understanding of the universe. There could be habitable ecosystems or signs of life that could be present, which we may discover. So such missions, they do serve a very important scientific purpose, and promotes international collaboration. And more importantly, it serves a socio-economic purpose as well. This is something that is unique about India's space program. See, ever since India started out its space program, since 1950s, 1960s, there has always been a strong criticism that why should a poor country like India have an expensive space program? Because having a space program is going to cost a lot of money, right? You have to set aside millions of dollars every year to build these technologies. So there have been questions within the country and from abroad as well. Just look at this cartoon over here, which was published by New York Times when India reached the Mars, when the Mangalyaan mission was successfully launched by ISRO in 2014. The New York Times ridiculed India. This was seen in European media as well. It was generally a Western stereotype where they were projecting India as a poor country which is reaching for an elite space club, while it should be solving problems of poverty, hunger, etc. But the reality of India's space program is that even though the program is expensive, of course, it requires a lot of investments, the program has always been designed by keeping the interests of the common man in mind. Every single space project, be it the remote sensing satellites, be it the cartographic satellites, or any other space mission of ISRO, they've all been designed by keeping in mind the interests of the common man. The space program of India is fundamentally designed to focus on the socio-economic problems of the country. These technologies which are developed, they will directly and indirectly help in improving the quality of life for the common citizen. For example, space technology is already being widely used for weather forecasting, for disaster management, for defense and security applications, for resource management. So these technologies they are already helping farmers, they are helping fishermen, they are helping the security of the nation, they are helping in our economic development, and our space assets have become the backbone of our economy today. So India's space program definitely serves a socio-economic purpose. It has been designed by keeping the interests of the common man in mind. This decimates these stereotypes promoted by Western media, right? Where questions have been raised about India's intentions, why India is splurging on these missions when it is still struggling with poverty and other problems. But the answer lies in the fact that these missions, directly and indirectly, the technologies, they will help the common man. The advances that you make in these relevant technologies will also increase the country's prestige at the global level. It will increase our bargaining power, and these emerging technologies will give rise to other spin-off technologies in various other sectors that will benefit the entire economy. Today, India is privatizing the space sector, allowing for private participation, allowing for space startups, and ISRO is outsourcing the technology so that the production can happen in the private sector. This will create millions of jobs, and the technology that is brought out into the public domain, into the civilian domain, will bring a lot of benefits to various sections of the society. From farmers to education to healthcare, many sectors will benefit from these technologies. I can give you one more example. Have you heard of the Pan-Africa E-Network project? It's an Indian soft power initiative to help poor African countries with remote education and remote healthcare. This is being provided through India's space assets, through ISRO satellites, and through an OFC network that we have laid across African countries. We are connecting African patients and students with Indian hospitals and colleges, thus delivering telemedicine and teleeducation to poor African countries. This is a classic example of how space investments can help the common man and can serve a socio-economic purpose. So that explains the significance of these space missions, and you should be prepared for a possible question here. UPSC might ask you to evaluate India's approach to the lunar surface. It might ask you to talk about the history of lunar missions, the significance of Chandrayaan 3, and a question asking you the relevance of these space missions for socio-economic development. So that is something you should be prepared for. Now let's move on to the next topic. We have multiple images and articles in today's newspaper referring to the disaster in northern India, particularly in Himachal Pradesh and also in parts of Punjab, Uttarakhand, Delhi NCR and UP and other parts of northern India. I'm sure all of you would have seen visuals on social media, on TV channels, or read about it in newspapers that northern India has been devastated by multiple flash floods, extreme rainfall, cloudbursts and landslides. Many people have lost their lives and there has been large-scale destruction of property and even damage to the environment. This image alone that Hindu carries on the first page depicts the scale of devastation that the disaster has caused. Now the same topic, we had covered this in detail on the 27th of June. I urge you to go back and watch this video because on the 27th of June, I had discussed the same topic in complete detail, but mainly from a disaster management perspective. I had spoken about flash floods, landslides, how do they occur, how are they interconnected, and what measures can you take in disaster management to mitigate the impact of these disasters. So please go back and watch the video later so that you understand these topics from a disaster management perspective. But however, there are two articles in today's newspaper that focus on the geography and the environment ecology aspect of the disasters. It's mainly focused on the root cause of these extreme weather events. We have a column looking at the impact of climate change and other local factors which could be driving these extreme weather events, leading to excessive rainfall, cloudbursts and flash floods. And we also have an article which talks about the man-made factors responsible, the anthropogenic factors, which are also responsible for aggravating the impact of such extreme weather events. So let's take a look at this. Let me take you through these points because it's very important from a geography and environment ecology perspective as well. But for a disaster management point of understanding, please go back and watch the video from the 27th of June. The column here is of the opinion that climate change, of course, plays a role in any weather phenomena that we are witnessing. Because global warming and climate change is a reality. We are living in a ecosystem right now which is warm and humid compared to earlier. Because of anthropogenic factors, because of burning of fossil fuels, we have altered the global temperature, we have altered the global weather and climatic conditions. And of course, there is an influence of these events in driving such extreme weather events. You cannot deny that. But linking every event with just climate change may not be the right approach because then you are ignoring the other local factors contributing to these extreme weather events. Because climate and weather, they are very complex events that are interconnected. There are many factors, many topographical, many other atmospheric factors which contribute to these conditions. So the writer is examining them based on a recent study which was conducted. He's pointing out the different factors, geographical factors, which could be responsible for such hazardous extreme weather events to occur. He points out one reason could be the delayed onset of monsoon. See, this time the monsoon onset was delayed, primarily triggered by cyclonic activity in the Arabian Sea. If you guys remember, just a few weeks back, before the monsoons arrived, we had cyclone Biparjoy that caused massive devastation in Gujarat and along the west coast of India. These cyclonic conditions prevailed and persisted in the Arabian Sea for a very long period of time, and this was a result of the warmer temperatures of the Arabian Sea waters. So these conditions noted in the Arabian Sea and the cyclonic activity led to a delayed onset of the monsoon, and this could have played a role in the sudden outburst of rainfall in northern parts of India. Along with that, there are other regional and extra-regional factors the writer is pointing out. He talks about the impact of El Nino. Currently, we are heading towards a El Nino period where we are going to witness warmer conditions in the Pacific, in the equatorial Pacific region, that is between Australia and Peru. Of course, these conditions, the El Nino conditions and the opposite of it, the La Nina condition, they have a direct impact on the Indian monsoon. El Nino condition is known to affect the monsoon rainfall. It's known to create a deficit rainfall. Along with that, there are other factors at play. You have western disturbances, local temperature conditions, because see, while some parts of India was receiving excessive heavy rainfall, few other parts of India in the same region were witnessing extreme temperatures and even forest fires. That's what the writer is pointing out. He points out those interesting anomalies. He says that while parts of Himachal Pradesh were suffering from heavy rains and floods, there were few parts of Himachal Pradesh suffering from extreme temperature as well. These localized changes, which is a result of atmospheric changes and other local geographical factors, they are connected with regional, extra-regional factors as well, right? So understanding that complex interplay is very, very important if we have to forecast these events. The writer is also talking about the impact of other extra-regional factors like the heating up of the Atlantic Ocean. The writer of the column, he was part of a study, a recent study which was published, according to which the Atlantic Ocean has heated up in the last few years. This high temperature being recorded in the Atlantic region could be having an impact on western disturbances and the wind circulation towards Central Asia and the Himalayan belt. He also talks about localized wind circulation near the Himalayan mountains. He says that near the Himalayas, the strong gust of winds that are brought out during the onset of monsoons triggers a clockwise and anti-clockwise circulation. And when these winds converge, it could trigger excessive rainfall in northwestern part of India. So it's not just one reason, one factor which is responsible. There is a complex interplay of multiple factors. There are local factors, regional factors, and extra-regional factors. Along with that, we have human-induced climate change and global warming, right? That is why the writer, he compares India's climatic system with that of a popcorn kettle. He says that India is like a popcorn kettle, right? During the summer season, the northern part of India especially, and even some interior parts of southern India, they heat up excessively like a popcorn kettle. And there are different types of weather phenomena witnessed in different parts of India because of this. Just like a popcorn pops anywhere, right, at random. Similarly, at few random places, heavy rainfall is witnessed. Cloudburst events are witnessed. This causes floods and landslides. But at some other places, there is extreme temperature, forest fires and droughts. So if we have to better understand these phenomena and the complex interplay between local, regional and extra-regional factors and attribute the disasters to climate change, the writer says that we need better forecasting. We need further research. We need to invest in further research and development. Because without making such investments, without furthering our technology in terms of understanding the impact of climate change and understanding the impact of these localized regional events, we will never be able to forecast these disasters prior, and that is when the disasters have a huge impact. So the writer is calling for appropriate investments to be made in climate forecasting, in research and development, so that we can improve our forecasting technologies, so that we can understand these complex factors and how they are connected to these events. Is that clear? Just linking everything with climate change or just attributing such disasters to one single event is a short-sighted approach. Is that clear? Climate and weather are very complex phenomena. There are multiple factors at play. That is what we need to understand from this article. In a related article on page number 12, the Hindu is talking about the anthropogenic factors which have aggravated the impact of the floods and the landslides. This is something that we cannot ignore. See, natural hazards, they always exist. Extreme weather events are bound to happen. There are areas which might receive heavy rainfall. There are areas which might witness forest fires. But the impact of these extreme weather events has gone up because of man-made factors, and you cannot ignore this factor. Anthropogenic factors like excessive deforestation, destruction of vegetation, that too in hilly, slopy areas. This has weakened the soil system. We have also destabilized the slopes through rampant, unsustainable construction activities. The construction of large projects like hydropower dams, highways, bridges in hilly, slopy areas is unsustainable. The development of settlements in the riverbed, in the drainage area, in the catchment basin is of course prone to the impact of disaster. If we are building towns and resorts and other habitation facilities in the downstream area of a river, obviously when there is heavy rainfall, the water is going to flood the encroached area, causing a disaster. These man-made factors have definitely aggravated the impact. The large-scale deforestation, the weakening of the soil system and the slopes in the hilly areas, the unsustainable construction and poor land use planning and poor enforcement of construction standards. All these factors have played a critical role in aggravating the impact of these disasters. That's why the article is calling for strict enforcement of land use planning. If you create different zones through hazard planning, right? If you identify the areas that are prone to a disaster and restrict human activity in such areas through zonation and land use planning standards, automatically you can bring down the impact of a disaster. That is what the article is talking about, right? So this is what we can learn from these incidents which have very badly affected northern India, especially Himachal Pradesh. Now coming to the next article, I'll be picking up an editorial from page number 6 that deals with the proposed amendments to the Forest Conservation Act. This is a very, very important topic with regard to environment and ecology. There is a related article as well on page number 10. So let's take a look at both these articles and understand this in complete detail. What is the context here? The context is that the Forest Conservation Act of 1980 is supposed to be amended. The Government of India has come out with an amendment bill which is likely to be tabled in the Parliament very soon in the upcoming monsoon session. Within a week, the monsoon session of the Parliament is going to begin, and the government is looking to table this amendment bill to amend the Forest Conservation Act of 1980. This bill has already generated a lot of controversy. Because of the controversial nature of the provisions, it had been recommended to a joint committee of the Parliament for further review. The main debate here is that the law is compromising environment protection for the sake of economic development. Now, this has always been a conflicting agenda. Providing for ecological conservation has always been seen to be in conflict with economic growth and development. Both are seen as contradictory ideas, right? It's obvious as well, because if you have to provide for economic growth, you have to exploit natural resources. You have to clear forest land, and this destroys your biodiversity, your forests, your ecosystems. But if you excessively focus on environment conservation and biodiversity protection, you will end up harming your economic growth. Now, both the objectives are equally important in a democratic state. See, it is equally important to create jobs, to provide for socio-economic welfare for our people, to provide better education, better healthcare. To do that, the government has to drive economic growth. It has to create large infrastructure. It has to open up different sectors and provide for exploitation of resources. But exploitation of resources could damage our environment and biodiversity, which has an adverse impact on human well-being. Correct? So any excessive focus on economic growth will definitely harm and damage our environment. And the vice versa is also true. Any obsession with environment conservation will compromise economic growth and development, which in turn affects welfare. So what is the solution here? The solution is sustainable development. Coming up with a sustainable approach so that the resources that we exploit is done in a sustainable manner, so that we don't over-exploit, we don't put our forests and environment under severe stress. While we protect the nature and the environment, we should parallelly promote economic growth and development which is sustainable. Right? So that is why the mantra of today's governance administration is sustainable development. So these laws, these environmental laws, such as Forest Conservation Act, they try to strike that balance between economic growth and environment conservation. So it's important to understand the background to this law. Why was this law brought in? What were the provisions under Forest Conservation Act? And why amendments are being proposed? And what is the controversy around it? So that is what we should understand. Now, if you look at the Forest Conservation Act, it was brought out in the year 1980, of course, to conserve and protect forest land. Right? The name of the law itself is telling you the purpose. The purpose is to conserve forest land. Prior to this act, prior to the FCA, which was enacted in 1980, we had few colonial laws passed by the British. The British had brought out the Indian Forest Act in 1865. Later, they replaced it with a newer version. But these laws were designed not to protect the environment, not to protect the forest. The British never cared about it. Right? These were exploitative colonial powers. Their only interest was in exploiting our resources. In the name of forest conservation, they restricted the activities of tribal communities. As you know, tribal communities have a very close relationship with forest and environment. Their livelihood, their sustenance is dependent on the forest. Tribal communities, they practice basic agriculture, hunting, grazing, and they collect minor forest produce to support their sustenance and livelihood. And in return, they protect their environment because they know their livelihood is dependent on it. So they have a very sacred relationship with the forest and the environment. The British laws broke this relationship. British laws were designed to disrupt tribal rights, traditional rights. They imposed taxes on collection of minor forest produce. They restricted tribal rights to access their own forest resources. This was all done to protect the commercial interests of British enterprises. In the name of environment conservation, they were destroying the tribal economy. They were harming tribal culture and looting India's resources for their own benefit. But post-independence, these laws were transformed. We introduced the Forest Conservation Act with the purpose of conserving and protecting India's forest land. Let me take you through the key objectives and the features of this law, and then we can talk about the proposed amendments. If you look at the objectives, the Forest Conservation Act is mainly designed to protect the forests along with the biodiversity which is contained within those forest areas. It is focused on arresting the loss of forest biodiversity, and the main focus is on preventing the diversion of forest land for non-forest commercial purposes. Because without such a law, forest land which is very precious could be diverted for non-forest activities, for agriculture, for commercial exploitation. So to prevent that from happening, provisions were added in the law so that forest land gets some degree of protection, so that it cannot be diverted for commercialization and non-forest commercial activities. So keeping this in mind, the law included several provisions and it gave tremendous powers to the central government. Through this law, the central government acquired powers to restrict even the state governments and the other authorities when it comes to taking decisions with regard to managing forest land. Is that clear? So central government acquired more powers to itself through the law. See, managing forest land, protection of forests and nature, it's under the concurrent list. It's a joint responsibility of the state and the center. But the center has given to itself more powers in terms of conserving forest land and managing forest land through this law, because it allows the central government to restrict the powers of the state. Almost complete authority has been vested with the central government in this regard. It can penalize those who violate the provisions. If there are industries causing harm to forest land, or if there are land mafias who are encroaching on forest land, those elements who are breaking the law can be penalized. Very strict penalties can be imposed on them through the law. And it provides for the establishment of an advisory committee by the central government, which will advise the center on forest conservation. These are some of the key excuse me. These are some of the key provisions of the law. It gave a lot of powers to the central government to restrict the state authorities. It gave powers to central government to manage and conserve forest land, penalize the violators, and establish an advisory committee to advise the government of India in terms of with regard to forest conservation. Now this law, even though it has served a purpose, it is definitely not enough to conserve and protect forest land. There is data available to prove this. Alright, now before we look at the deficiencies of the Forest Conservation Act, let us talk about how the law has helped in curbing industrialization of forest areas. See, industrialization inevitably means that forest land will be taken away for industries and urbanization, which means there will be afforestation and destruction of forest land. This is where the law empowers the authority, the state, the central government to regulate and impose cost on industrial exploitation. This is a key provision of the law. This is what empowers the central government, and it allows the center to empower the state as well to levy these penalties on the violators so that there is no excessive exploitation by the industries. But initially, the jurisdiction of the law was applicable only to notified forest land. Only the land which was officially categorized, which was officially notified as forest land by the state government, only such land would come under the protection of Forest Conservation Act. But later the Supreme Court stepped in 1996, and through the T.N. Godavaram Tirumal Pad case, the Supreme Court widened the jurisdiction of the law and provided for coverage of non-forest land as well. Forest-like areas which are not notified, which are not classified by the state as forest land, even they were brought under the coverage of the law by the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court broadened the scope of its application in this historic case. But still the law is not sufficient to conserve and protect our forest land, and there is a dire need for amendments. That's what the editorial is also pointing out. Even though it has all these provisions, it is still not enough, because if you look at the results, our forest cover has not really increased substantially. Over the last few decades, the government of India is claiming that our forest cover has increased substantially, and today we are supposed to have 24% of our geographical area under forest and tree cover. But experts disagree with this claim of the government. They don't agree with the survey report of Forest Survey of India, because they feel that the forest cover, tree cover which is being computed under this survey is mainly taking into account orchards, plantations and other community forest land, which is not genuine natural forest. See, the Forest Survey of India, FSI, conducts a biennial exercise. It brings out the state of forest report that estimates the coverage of forest and tree cover in India. According to the report, the government is claiming that there is a substantial increase in forest land. The government is claiming 24% of our land area is covered with forest and tree cover. But according to experts, this is far from reality, because the survey is accounting even artificial forest land, cultivated forest land, such as plantations and orchards and community forest land as part of forest cover. Now this is where the editorial is taking a stand. It is saying that you can't equate cultivated forest land with natural forests. Natural forests, they bring about biodiversity. They help in absorbing excess carbon, act as a carbon sink. But cultivated forest land such as plantations and other community-led forest initiatives, they may not be the entire solution to strengthen and build up your forest cover. This is where the law is lacking. The law does not really incentivize the protection, conservation and cultivation of forest land. The survey is taking into account any tree cover as part of forest and tree cover, thus artificially increasing the forest cover of India. According to experts, according to the editorial, the increase in forest cover of India is only marginal. If you take into account only natural forest area, the growth is stagnant, or at the best it is incremental growth. On one hand, India has claimed, or India has committed to the Paris Agreement that we are going to increase our forest cover to 33% of our land area. This is one of the commitments we have made as part of the intended nationally determined contributions, the voluntary contributions we have announced as part of Paris Agreement, which is under the Climate Change Convention. India has claimed that it will create a carbon sink of 2.5 to 3 billion tons by increasing the forest cover of the country to more than 33% of our geographical area. The government is saying we are very close to achieving the target. But in reality, what is the quality of these forests? That is the question the editorial is raising. Do these cultivated forest lands and tree cover, do they act as a carbon sink? Are they the same as natural forests? Can you equate them? Right? That is the question. The current law does not incentivize the cultivation and promotion of forest land. This is the major flaw that exists. According to reports, from 2019 to 2021, India has added 1,540 square kilometers of forest cover, out of which 1,509 square kilometers was outside the recorded forest area. It means most of the forest area we are claiming to add is coming from private community initiatives, from plantations, agroforestry, etc. And upon that, the law is not incentivizing such initiatives. The Ministry of Environment has claimed that the law should be amended because it is not incentivizing grooming of forest land, creation of more tree cover and private agroforestry. But the concern of environmental experts is that if amendments are brought in to promote and incentivize plantation activities and agroforestry, this could end up commercializing the forest areas. It could lead to commercialization of forests. In the name of forest conservation and increasing the forest cover, the government could be incentivizing agroforestry and plantation activities which will actually destroy the natural forest cover. The government has said that amendments are needed because the law is not incentivizing these community-led initiatives and agroforestry initiatives. But experts are pointing out you can't equate such artificial tree cover which is created, which is groomed, with natural biodiversity and natural forests. Now, if you look at the proposed amendments, the new amendments are looking to give those incentives. They are clearly defining the jurisdiction of the law, because previously the law applied only for forest land. Later, Supreme Court, through the 96 judgment, had expanded the application of the law, covering even non-notified forest areas. Now, only land recorded as forest in a government record after 1980 will invoke the provisions of the Act. Only such forest land which is notified after 1980 will enjoy the protection of the law, which means forest land notified before 1980 could be opened up for commercial exploitation. Forest land authorized by states for non-forestry uses between 1980 and 1996 would not invoke the provisions. If state governments, let's say, they have opened up forest land for non-forestry applications, maybe for agriculture, for tribal activities or for commercialization. If this has been done between 1980 and 1996, then forest conservation laws will not apply, which means it is further encouraging commercialization of forest land. And the bigger concern is that it is taking away the power of the state governments. If the amendments are passed, states can no longer classify unclassified forest land as forest land. Currently, states have the power to notify forest land. This power will be taken away and it will be vested only with the center, which means the center can open up forest areas for more development, more commercialization, and this could lead to destruction of our forest areas. That is the criticism which has come up. The amendment also proposes that up to 100 kilometers near our international borders, forest area can be taken up for strategic security purposes even without any approval from the central government. Now this is a very serious alarming proposition. Because of security reasons, the government is proposing that security agencies, armed forces, they can take up forest land and use it for security and strategic purposes up to 100 kilometers near the border without even approval from the central government. So all these provisions, the government says it is necessary, it is needed. It will increase forest cover, it will incentivize agroforestry, plantations and orchards, which will increase our forest and tree cover according to the government. The government says it will increase our carbon sink while appropriately commercializing the forest land. And it also helps in meeting the security needs in border areas. So government is saying that these proposed amendments, they strike a balance between growth and environment conservation. But critics are not happy. They are not agreeing with it. Critics are concerned that it will only lead to degeneration of the natural forest. In the name of promoting private forest land, groomed forest areas, and since it is incentivizing afforestation, it will destroy the natural forest cover of the country, and the concern is that even the parliamentary committee has not given a way forward. The joint parliamentary committee which has examined the proposed amendments, right? It has the statutory power to come out with recommendations and suggest a few more changes. But the parliamentary committee has not suggested any amendments. It has not given any opinion or suggestion. So most likely government is going to table the bill and it will be enacted because the government has enough numbers in the parliament. So critics are worried that groomed private forests are not the same as natural forests. They are worried that it will further incentivize commercialization of forest land, and more importantly, in the name of security and strategic reasons. If forest area near the borders is taken away without proper consensus, then this could harm our environment and biodiversity. Many opposition parties have opposed the bill. They have pointed out, they have raised an alarm about the exemption being made here on security grounds. This is a blanket exemption. The process has not been defined. So security forces, if they feel that forest land is necessary for security reasons within 100 kilometers of the international border, they can make use of the forest land and even take up deforestation without approvals from the center. Right? Yes, the security concerns are understandable, but there should be a system of checks and balances. So opposition parties are opposing it, they're against some of the provisions. That is why the proposed amendment bill has become so controversial. So please keep a track of this development. It's a developing story. We will cover this again. Of course, once it's tabled in the parliament and once it passes through the parliament, we will have further discussion on this. But the history, the objectives, the provisions, the need for amendment, what are the amendments being proposed, and the criticism, all these points are very, very important. Alright, so this completes my discussion of all the big articles. Now we move towards the smaller articles and look at the prelims oriented information. On page 12, we have a important article that refers to the Global Multidimensional Poverty Index, which is brought out by UNDP, the UN Development Program. According to the Multidimensional Poverty Index, India has lifted 415 million people out of poverty in the last 15 years. Now this is an incredible achievement, right? This is essentially 41.5 crore people being lifted out of poverty in the last 15 years. That shows the development agenda of India, the development path of India, and how India has successfully lifted people out of poverty levels. Now, to measure poverty, there are different indicators and scales which are used. For example, previously we had the Planning Commission, which was using calorie intake or daily income as a measure to determine poverty levels in the country. But according to UNDP and an organization known as the Oxford Poverty and Human Development Initiative, OPHI, which is part of the University of Oxford, they came out with a theory that poverty is not just about lack of money. See, generally, whenever we tried estimating poverty levels in our country, we set up different committees. The erstwhile Planning Commission had set up various committees like the Tendulkar Committee, and there were many other committees as well, which would come up with different measures of poverty. They would either recommend a calorie-based measure depending on the daily calorie intake, right? Those who consume below that threshold, they would be assumed to be poor people. And the calorie intake is directly dependent on their daily wages, on their daily income. There were other committees which had recommended daily wages or daily income as a threshold to determine poverty levels. That's how Planning Commission had reached a conclusion that those who earn above 30 rupees per day, they don't fall under the poverty bracket. So this was not seen as an ideal way of estimating poverty, because poverty is not just about lack of money. Poverty is a vicious cycle, and this is the concept that UNDP and Oxford University brought out. They said that poverty is multidimensional. Poverty is linked with many other factors. It's not just about the lack of money, the lack of ability to feed the family, lack of education, lack of health care, and many other related factors contribute to poverty, and it creates a vicious cycle. For example, a family which cannot afford good education, right? If the children in the family, let's say they drop out of school because the family is not able to afford their education. Because of their poor education, they may not be able to secure good jobs. Then in the next generation, the family may not be able to afford quality health care. They may not be able to access good nutrition, leading to malnutrition, child mortality, compromised health care, and this in turn affects their overall standard of living. The family cannot afford clean cooking fuel. They can't afford electricity. They can't afford clean drinking water, sanitation. So there are multiple factors at play. Poverty is not just about the money a person is earning, that a family is earning in a single day, or the amount of food or the calorie of food that they are consuming in a single day. It's much more than that. That is the concept that Oxford University came out with UNDP, and they launched the Multidimensional Poverty Index in the year 2010, which is brought out along with the HDI report. As part of the Human Development Index that the UNDP brings out, Multidimensional Poverty Index is also brought out by UNDP and the Oxford University. It measures multiple indicators of deprivation. It measures factors related to lack of healthcare, lack of education, poor standard of living, right? All these indicators are captured, covering these three dimensions, which constitutes the Multidimensional Poverty Index. So poor education, poor healthcare, poor standard of living collectively contribute to poverty and creates a vicious cycle. So if a government has to lift people out of poverty, it has to break that cycle. The government has to not just provide for basic food and basic livelihood, it has to provide for better education, better healthcare, ensure students are able to complete their years of schooling, ensure women, children have access to good nutrition, good health care, right? Ensure there are livelihood opportunities available. All these factors have to be addressed to lift people out of poverty. And that is the advantage of Multidimensional Poverty Index. And the UNDP has been bringing this out since 2010 along with Oxford Poverty and Human Development Initiative. Is that clear? So in the latest report, it has pointed out that around 19 countries in the world have reduced their poverty levels by half, by 50%, and India is one of them. From 2005-2006 to 2015-16, during this decade, between 2005 and 2015, during this decade, 19 countries have reduced their poverty levels by more than 50%. This is a massive achievement and India is one of them. India has joined the ranks of other countries like China, Cambodia, Indonesia, Vietnam and others. 415 million Indians have been lifted out of poverty according to this credible index. So it's very, very important from a prelims point of view. Even in your mains answers, you can directly make use of this data, this information. You can quote this while talking about India's progress in the last 15 to 20 years. Now coming to the last article for today, on page 13, in the international relations section, we have a small article that refers to a missile called the SCALP missile. It's also called the Storm Shadow. It's known by two different names. It's a long-range air-launched missile developed by UK and France. Please note down the facts. UK and France have jointly developed the SCALP missile, also called the Storm Shadow, which you can see in the image over here. It's an air-launched long-range cruise missile, and it's in news because France has agreed to transfer the missiles to Ukraine to help Ukraine defend against Russian aggression. Is that clear? Just knowing the basic details here can be helpful. The SCALP missile is used on the French Rafale fighter jets. UK uses the Storm Shadow version of it on its Eurofighter Typhoon fighter jet. Is that clear? So this long-range air-launched cruise missile, which is very useful in targeting land-based targets and even aerial targets, it's being transferred to Ukraine by France and UK. This is part of the Western military assistance to Ukraine to fight back against the Russian aggression. So please note down the basic details about the missile. It could be helpful for your prelims. So with this, I bring my today's discussion to an end. We have covered multiple topics along with many subtopics as well. I hope you guys have understood all the key topics. If you have liked it, just let us know in the comments and take up the questions that I've given here for your mains answer writing practice. The questions are based on what we've already discussed. So expect all of you to take this seriously, write your answers and submit them on the answer writing portal, for which link has been given in the description box below. Also head to our Telegram channel because we'll have a quiz on some of these topics. It'll help you revise and go through these topics again. So that is it from my side. Thanks for watching. Have a good day.